You shouldn't go, I'm Jeff, and then wait for me to say, I'm George. You should say, I'm Jeff, this is George, and I go, or whatever. That way you're like the announcer. You know what I mean? That's how I see everybody else.
Could you please do exactly that? That's amazing.
Classic comics, the classic comics forum in there. Snappy conversations with your hosts George and Jeff. Oh, classic comics, the classic comics forum in there. Talking about old comic books is the thing that they love the best.
It's a CCF in Depth with your hosts, Jeff Heller and George Nieves.
Hey! Hey! Jim Shooter forever.
Talking about Jim Shooter forever.
Every episode. I don't know what's wrong with you.
It's all me, of course. Well, anyway, hey everybody. It's well, this is weird because we're on video this time. It's CCF in Depth season 2, which is crazy. We've now been doing this for a year, and we figured it was about time to go kicking and screaming into the 2020s. So we're doing this is a video version of it for those of you watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast, we're going to sound the same. And I promise you won't do anything that you'll miss out if you're listening audio only. So, George, put that love doll down, okay?
See, we have video evidence I don't have a love doll, okay?
On camera, at least.
But you get to see the advantage is now that it's video, you get to see all my geeky, stupid old man swag. Shame on me for still having it.
The blow-up doll looks like Brother Power the Geek. It's really, really weird.
We can move on.
We can. So this, it is weird. I'm giddy about this. Like, we've done this a million times, but doing this on video is different, isn't it?
You know what? You get to see my face, and I know you're digging it. You know what I mean?
That's
the thing. You know, you get to see this beauty.
I'm wishing I was a Brother Power the Geek blow-up doll right now.
That's too weird. please cut that out.
You know, when you say that, I'm just going to put it in the beginning of the episode. Have you learned nothing over the past year?
A whole year.
All right. Well, so for those of you who have never checked out the CCF in Depth before, what we basically do is George and I have a topic and we ramble about it for a really long time. I cut it, edit into something semi-coherent, and then you watch it and you tell us what we said wrong. Good plan, right?
And we always agree.
Always.
No, we don't. I don't know why.
So this episode's topic, we are talking about Avengers number 200. George, you brought it up a while ago. You said Jim Shooter never did anything bad. I said, okay, let's do Avengers 200 eventually. And now we're talking about Avengers number 200. So briefly break it down for our people listening, George. Why do people talk about Avengers 200? Why is this worthy of a whole episode?
Well, in Avengers 197, written by Dave Michelini, they introduced a subplot where Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel at the time, was pregnant. The problem was the pregnancy appeared 3 days. In the 3 days, she was 3 months pregnant. And then 2 days later, she had to give birth. So it was unnatural. Plus, it came out in the story that there was no man, there was no father. So the mystery begins. Now, we go all the way, that's a subplot pretty much, from 197 to 200, where she actually has the baby. And it turns out to be a convoluted story. But the thing is, they have multiple writers accredited on issue 200. One of them is, of course, Dave Michelini, and the next one is Jim Shooter. And guess what? Also, George Perez is known as part of the writing. So this whole debacle about her getting pregnant and giving birth and sort of getting raped in a way, sexually assaulted, it all lands on Jim Shooter when I'm like, well, hold on a minute, Skippy. You had Dave Michelini write all the books, and you had an editor called Jim Salicrup that could have at any time said, what are you doing? Why are you making somebody pregnant? And yet, Jim Shooter, who comes in to try to fix the story at the end, gets all the blame. So, that's just not right, man.
And to be fair, this is probably the weirdest thing about this story is in a story that's all about a character essentially being brainwashed and losing the memories of what happened to her. Everyone involved in creating the issue kind of got Miss Marveled. None of them remember how the script came to be. So
Miss Marveled.
I'm verbing it. So
I feel like I got Miss Marvel with that comment.
So, I mean, you said they brought to Jim Shooter at the end. The fact of the matter is neither he nor David Michelini nor Bud Bagansky nor George Perez actually have any recollection of how that issue came to be written. So no one's really sure what happened.
You know what? We didn't even go through the plot. This is what the plot was. She's pregnant. Issue 200 is revealed that the baby comes out, and in hours, it goes all the way to like age 20 something. And it turns out it's Immortus's son. Immortus, a time traveler that's an enemy of the Avengers for many years. And this is big, goofy plot where he was born from Immortus, but he was trapped in a limbo because Immortus was destroyed, I think, in Avengers 143 or something like that. And so his plan to get out of limbo was to abduct or lure Miss Marvel in, romance her, and then have himself impregnated in her so he could come to Earth. And the whole plan was so he could live on Earth. And it's just, I'm like, David Michelini, you created Venom. You created a lot of great concepts. What happened? What's this pregnancy thing, man? So now you have this mess. She's born, whatever. But this is the thing I heard about from Jim Shooter said about this. He said the reason they had a different ending and a whole different way it was going to get resolved. But it was so similar to What If number 20 that came out like January 1980, like 5 months before that Avengers issue, that they had to change the ending. So I look quickly at what if the Avengers fought the Kree-Skrull War without Rick Jones? This will make a person in a forum named Captain very happy because he loves Rick Jones. But anyway, long story short, Rick Jones gets killed right away, and the Supreme Intelligence combines and makes a being with Rick Jones. Now, I'm thinking that the original plot was that Marcus was going to come to Earth and get combined maybe with Miss Marvel and one person, not pregnancy, but something else. And they had to jettison the story or jettison the ending. They said that it was so similar that they figured they have to do something else. But again, just the beginning of it was that she's pregnant to bring his person into Earth. And there's a million problems with that. So I don't even know how you could fix that to have a good ending or okay ending. But maybe I'm thinking that at that time, they thought what DC thought, that we were all 13-year-olds and who cares? And you could write any stupid story and it'll go. Who cares, Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I think you hit the nail on the head that a big part of the problem with this is the time period in which it was made, in which comics were aging up. We were hitting in a larger, older audience of, adults now. And I don't think you could have made this story for kids, 15 years earlier, but certainly it wasn't going to play well with adults, and certainly not with adult women who are part of the fan base. Chris Claremont, a year and a half later, tried to sort of right this wrong with Avengers Annual number 10 and kind of reflect on that and show why it was all messed up. But his inspiration for that came from a fan named Carol Strickland, who wrote an article in LOC number 1 that really kind of drew attention to this in the first place about the audacity of it. And to be clear, if anyone missed it from the summary you gave earlier, the real problem with this story is the idea of using a woman's body and her reproductive abilities as a plot device with no regard or concern for the actual character herself. And the real problem is this could have been done to any female character. There was nothing specifically Ms. Marvel about it. It didn't have any significance specifically for that character. It was just, we need someone who can reproduce. This will make a great plot device. It'll make for a really zany conflict. At the end, it'll all be fine. She'll be in love or something. And that was really what was so disturbing about it.
Well, they try to clean it up with issue 200 and say, well, it had to be Miss Marvel because her physiology, that's a cross between Kree and human, was able to contain the temporal energies or mumbo jumbo, so to try to make it right. But you're right. And you're saying that it was a different time, but man, if this story was written in 2024, they'd be burning down Marvel comic books right now.
Well, what's weird too is anybody who is a Star Trek fan and a comic book fan might recognize this plot and think it's familiar. That 8 years later in Star Trek Next Generation, they did an episode called The Child, the first episode of season 2, that is almost the exact same plot. It's this alien being impregnates Deanna Troi, and she's becoming pregnant super fast for no reason. There's no discomfort. She gives birth to the baby. The baby is the father. The father just used her to get born and then disappears, and she's happy and hunky-dory and fine. They move on like nothing ever happened.
Wow. Well, who wrote that? Dave Michelini also?
There's no crossover.
It was
no, not at all. It's weird though. And the big difference between the two, there are two. And one is that they move on as if nothing ever happened, where at least in Avengers number 200, for better and for worse, she goes off with the alien. Like her life is changed by this. And in fact, she's kind of taken out of commission, is no longer an Avenger. Even though she didn't choose to be a mother, she's now going to be the stay-at-home mom of a space god, I guess. But number two is, I think this is the really important difference, is that in the Star Trek episode, the character Deanna Troi is only mildly unsettled by this. Whereas really the biggest problem with 197 through 200 is Michelini really works hard to make Carol Danvers disturbed by this. Like she has some great, moments where she's freaked out by what is happening to me.
Yeah, she resents the whole thing. And the Avengers, when the baby's born, they're like, oh, coochie coochie coo and all this other stuff. And she's like, that thing is not my kid. So the way they fixed it up in the story is they try to say, well, it wasn't that he just impregnated her. He romanced her when they were in limbo. He did everything. He had Beethoven. He had everybody, every person from different time eras to try to woo her, and he did. And they imply, and they actually have a picture of it. I'm not pulling it out now, but that they kind of had sex in limbo.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how that works.
The weird part about that too, though, is on the one hand, they show him, intergalactically whining and dining her and giving her all these nice things. But he also makes it explicitly clear that he was mentally controlling her, and he wiped her memory afterwards.
He says that he uses some machines or whatever that Immortus had. But this is the thing that wraps it up. At the end, he's going to go back to limbo, and she decides, end of 200, she decides to go with him because she feels she has feelings for him and whatever. And the whole thing is wacky. But see, Chris Claremont destroys the Avengers. Oh, they suck, and how come they allowed this to happen? But they tried to talk her out of it. Iron Man and Hawkeye go, whoa, you're not going anywhere. And she kind of insists on it. So what are they supposed to do? I mean, I don't know. In story, what were they supposed to do? Restrain her?
Yeah, they gave a half-hearted, are you sure this is what you want?
Hawkeye, they said, no, we're not letting you go off with this guy. And they said, no, I have to see where this is going to go. And they kind of hug her and, oh, good luck. And I'm like, this is crazy,
And again, I think a lot of this comes down to, I think the story could have played differently if she hadn't been so disturbed in the beginning. I think it really is, I think Michelini did such a good job making her freaked out. Just to read a couple quotes from those issues that are incredible that I saved. You've got Wanda Maximoff is trying to comfort her, who's only first learning about this. And Ms. Marvel goes, it isn't Ms. Marvel who's found herself 6 months pregnant in less than 24 hours. It's Carol Danvers. And to be painfully honest, Carol Danvers is scared. And those images are dark, her face eclipsed in shadows. And then, when we move on to the next issue and the Avengers discover she's pregnant, it's only Beast and Wasp who are like overly excited about it and are kind of missing the point. And it's kind of implied in those panels that this is a dark thing to be taken seriously, but those two aren't getting it. And then we get to issue 200 and they have that abrupt change of plan because of what you talked about. And suddenly you can tell they just don't know what they're doing. It's like, I love the scene where Cap and the Avengers are interviewing the baby, and the baby's kind of giving them lip talk, and it's like, "Who's your dad?" "I am, of course." And like, you little shits. Like it's almost like they're playing it for comedy when this was supposed to be this really disturbing thing because they don't know where to go or what to do now. So they're just kind of putzing around. And suddenly in my notes, I have written down, wait, let me find the exact wording I wrote to myself. Hold on. I wrote down dinosaurs, black knights, and musketeers. Who's your father? I am. The story is so gosh darn silly because they are just winging it as they go. And I can believe no one remembers it because you can tell it was done at the seat of the flight. They're flying at the seat of their pants. They don't really know what they're doing.
But they started in 197. There was a thought that the writer went to his editor and said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to make Miss Marvel pregnant."
Yeah.
That should have been like, "Oh, no, you're not."
But that could have been handled. That could have been handled tastefully. And because
this is the thing. When you talk about in universe in these comic books, anytime something happens that's, hold on, how did this happen? You have to start thinking, okay, this is either Dr. Doom, Kang, or this is an enemy attack. This is not an innocent thing. You have to think the worst. That's the business they're in. Anytime something happens, hey, this could be Terrence the Tamer or whoever, you know? So I mean, anything they shouldn't be trusting at all. The idea that Wasp was oh, I'm so happy for you, and the beasts go coochie coochie coo to the baby. I'm like, this is ridiculous. There was a lot of things wrong with this.
And I think we were supposed to, at that point, when those two are doing that, realize the tragedy that Carol Danvers is in. Wanda certainly gets it. You know, and Captain America suspects it at that point. If issue 200 had been done very differently, if they'd written the story as originally planned, it might have been handled more tastefully. I don't know that it would have been. I have my doubts. There's definitely issues we can get into about treatment of women in women's bodies by everyone involved in this comic book, except maybe George Perez. Actually,
he was co-plotter. Sorry, he has to take some of the blame.
According to Jim Shooter, what would happen was, and this is his explaining Perez's involvement, a lot of times when Perez was doing the art, he would make changes in the artwork that would fundamentally change the plot, and they were always good, so Shooter went with it. He wasn't usually, it wasn't like with Wolfman and the Titans later on. He wasn't actually at the table discussing plot with them. It was things that he adjusted and changed as he was drawing.
Well, I guess I'm thinking an issue 200 comes along, the baby's going to give birth already. I mean, you know, the horse is out of the barn. It's too late. You know, once you gave her a belly that she's pregnant, there's nowhere to go. And you know what? You want to know something? That's not the only time in comic books this happened. This happens again in 1994 with the Justice League. They make Power Girl pregnant.
Wow.
You know about that one? Yeah, she gives birth during 0 hour.
No, I was smart.
Some kind of mystical whatever. When they retconned everything after the crisis, they made her Arion's granddaughter. Arion is even like a mystical person from Atlantis. And from what I understand, Arion implants a creature in her, a baby, whatever. I mean, but at least he didn't implant himself, but he implants a baby to fight like a demon when it finally gets out. But
what is
still
this
talking about having her violated and somebody put something in the oven, which isn't okay.
What is this semi-universal rape fantasy that comic creators seem to have?
I don't know, man.
Wow.
I mean, unless it took 14 years more to do it again.
Well,
stop doing it, guys.
No means no, and not even being aware of it is a definite no. Is that? I mean, does it need to be said?
She said Danvers says many times, "There's no father."
Yeah.
In other words, I had no sex. This is not a thing.
Oh, they make
Power Girl was having sex with a lot of people.
Not so that changes it, but yeah.
Not that it changes it, but at least you can say, well, it could be Hal Jordan or it could be Aquaman or whatever.
Yeah.
But this woman says nobody had sex with me, so you know somebody better call the Fantastic Four and see if Dr. Doom is loose.
I think the most powerful lines that are said about it come from issue number 200. I think it's issue 200. Yeah, it is, where Carol says, Wasp says to her, "I just want to congratulate the proud parent." She's got those big, buggy, vapid eyes. Her beautiful baby, Carol. You're so lucky to. And Carol just shuts her down and says, "Lucky, Wasp? Think about what you just said. I've been used. That is my baby. I don't even know who the father is. So if you want to help me, please, just leave me alone."
Very awkward. But I mean, you know, again, I don't know where they're going with this.
Well, it's weird because, you know, we do know there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen for this one. And it feels like Michelini, who did the scripting, is actually trying to build sympathy for Carol in trying to understand the enormity of what she's going through. But then the plot itself just kind of goes, happy ending!
Well, you know what? Let me ask you something, Jeff. Has anybody been raped at this point in comic books?
Not to the best. Well,
Major
yes.
character. I don't mean somebody in weird war stories. I'm talking about like, the big two major comic book superhero characters.
Not the major core ones, but ironically, the one Marvel character I know of who had been raped by this point was written by Chris Claremont, and that was Murata the She-Wolf. But she certainly wasn't Avengers level.
But she wasn't Main Street comic, but that was like a epic.
Yes, and really that drove.
And I guess Sonya, right? So Red Sonya, that was her origin, right? She got raped by soldiers and.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you know Conan, Red Sonya.
Yeah, I know who Red Sonya is. I've never read a Red Sonya comic. But
well,
I know at least
I think she gets raped. Her village gets killed. She gets raped, and then some kind of goddess comes in, gives her powers, and says, you know, you could kick everybody's ass now, but don't have sex with men.
I mean, I at least know with Murata the She-Wolf, who in some ways was a thinly veiled Red Sonya ripoff.
It was.
That rape actually drove her character arc. It made it meaningful. There was a reason for it. It was horrific, and it was treated as such. And it was all about her bouncing back from that and figuring out how to be strong again when she'd endured that. It was as tasteful as. Let me be careful. I don't want to call it tasteful.
Easy there.
If you're going to work something like rape into a comic book, you darn well do it for a reason, and you darn well do it in a way that has respect for the violence and the horror of that crime. And when Claremont did it with Murata the She-Wolf, he absolutely understood what he was undertaking and did it with as much taste as he was capable of treating it with. Whereas this is a plot device that's quickly dismissed immediately afterwards, and that's the real issue with it.
Yeah. You know, the only other thing I could think of that dealt with rape was Sue Dibney. And she got raped by Dr. Light.
An Identity Crisis, which was such
a crisis. But
terrible.
You know what?
That was awful.
I'm willing to say that's better than all these other rapes because it's a bad guy raping a woman. Sorry, they're bad guys.
Yeah, but
you don't want to see it, but I'm just saying that these are terrible people.
We could get into Identity Crisis at another point if we wanted to, but I
like that series actually.
The point of when someone brings that up, there's always the point of, listen, you've got men, you've got women, you've got violence, you've got sadistic bad guys. Someone's going to rape somebody. My response to that is always, yes, but one, do it tastefully, and two, then why is it only the women getting raped? Why isn't the Joker sodomizing Batman every time he captures him?
There is a theory that the Joker did sodomize Commissioner Gordon.
Oh yeah, and
the Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Off camera.
I think just in general, if you're going, I think if you'd said to the people involved in the story when they wrote it, this is a rape comic, they would have looked at you confused and said, "What? No, it's not." I don't think they're even thinking that it was rape. But what do you mean?
You mean Avengers 197 to 200 is a rape comic? They should have put that on top of the banner.
Oh boy, yeah, the CCA would have loved
that. A rape banner, yeah, get you a lenticular cover.
I think the point just being that this was so dismissive of, and you know, we have to get into the issue of whose fault this is, inevitably. I'm going to ultimately not argue it comes down to Jim Shooter.
Jim Shooter, I'll put this right off right now.
I'm not going to ultimately say that it came down.
Before you even give
the man's not even going to let me talk.
Jeff, before you give the theory, hold on.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, yes.
I just don't want any of those things to penetrate into my head.
Penetrate, George?
You may start.
Poor choice of words, maybe.
Cut that out. Edit that out, please.
You know, I think who can ever really know who's to blame for this? And I think that the evidence points towards Michelini, however you say it, more than anybody. But you know, Shooter has a history of using women's bodies as plot devices without any regard for their character. He's done it numerous times. When we did I can't believe I didn't bring it up when we did the Valiant episode. You know, Harbinger, which was the #1 best-selling Valiant title. You know, there's Chris is the girlfriend to Sting, the main character with the psychic powers. He can control people's thoughts. And at one point, Chris becomes accidentally pregnant with another guy's baby. And the entire purpose of that story arc, which only takes like 2 issues, it goes weirdly fast, even though it's not supposed to be fast. It's supposed to happen in real time. The entire purpose of that storyline is to show how it affects Sting. Poor Sting, can he handle the fact that she has another man's child inside of her? And they never spend any time at all talking about what it means for her. And if you go even further...
She wasn't raped, though.
Well, I understand that. But if you go even further back, she was, because in Harbinger #0, the first story, Sting was mentally controlling her to make her like him and almost make her have sex with him before she fights him and goes, wait, what were we just about to do? And then ends up dating him anyway because she feels bad for him. Chris has no personality anywhere in that story arc, but her body is there conveniently enough to constantly serve Sting's needs and Sting's subplots. And that's just one example of Shooter doing this.
Well, this is a book that came later on in the 90s, and it just shows that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely.
What does that have to do with it?
What has to do with it is Peter Stanchek. That's who you're talking about, Sting. He had this power that he could control anybody, and he wanted this girl. And I'm sure he said no to himself 100 times, but the 101st time he says, I want her, and that's it.
But that could have been a powerful story.
It's more mature that way.
But that could have been a powerful story if she breaks away from his influence, never sees him again, and he has to wrestle with the, what did I almost do? I'm a monster. But that's not what happens. Instead, a couple panels later, he's in trouble. She comes back to his aid. Everything's forgiven and forgotten, and she loves him again.
Well, I need to take this off because I think it's penetrating anyway. I'm gonna say this: that you're skipping one part. I mean, okay. This is not about the Harbinger. But I'm gonna say this: she does realize that she's being manipulated, and she tells him, "If you ever do that again, I'm gonna kill you while you're sleeping."
And stays with him anyway, and loves him anyway, and supports him through thick and thin.
Well, I mean, she cared about him anyway, but what it's doing is setting boundaries.
But she didn't even if she did, that wouldn't make that okay or realistic. But number 2, she didn't care about him until he mentally controlled her the first time. Anyway, this is not about Harbinger. I'm just pointing out that Shooter does have
something else you want to blame Jim Shooter for. Shame on you.
He has a track record, and I've told my story a number of times about what the Dark Horse relaunch Shooter did with Dr. Solar, when the main character's girlfriend / fiance is being serially raped by a demon with no regard for the impact it's having on her as a character because she has no personality. It's just happening issue after issue as a way of giving the main character an obstacle to overcome. It's not about her at all. She's just a plot device. Her being raped repeatedly is just there to make him feel like less of a man and to give him a reason to fight back.
So what's the legacy of this Avengers 200? I mean, is anything lasting out of it, or is it just another story that's forgotten?
I think the biggest problem is from the Kree Skrull War onto number 200. Avengers was a pretty solid franchise that rarely ever had more than 1 or 2 lull issues. And then whether it's because they got backlash over the story or because they had to completely replan at the last minute, it ends up in no man's land for a long time after this before finally getting back on its feet. This begins a really, really bad era of Avengers when it had been rock solid for so long.
About a year.
Yeah.
But it coincides with George Perez leaving and going to DC. So there's that.
Yeah, I think part of the problem, too, is what was inevitable was Shooter had been the one writing this before he got promoted to editor-in-chief and then never really permanently replaced himself afterwards. It's always sort of, a round robin of people filling in. And Michelini's in there more than most people are, but I
think he did a decent job.
But there's something with Michelini. I don't really know the story because it happened on his Iron Man run as well. He's almost never doing the plots. He writes the scripts, but from somebody else's plots each time. And Shooter's coming back in and writing a bunch of stories while he's editor-in-chief, which probably wasn't the best choice for the title. And then you end up with an issue like this where nobody even knows who did what because nobody was really in charge of the book.
I'll reiterate, the time to stop this all was not 197. When somebody, if it isn't Dave Michelini, somebody says, "Hey, why do we make Carol Danvers pregnant from an unknown person from another dimension that's trying to come to Earth?" Somebody should have said, "I think we'll pass on that."
Well, they couldn't have, because as much as we don't know whose idea it was, and actually now I'm convincing myself it wasn't Michelini because he didn't do plots for the most part. Shooter definitely knew about it because he's the one who finally overruled it and said, well, wait a second, what if just did this? We can't do it now. So the editor of the book couldn't overrule Shooter. So if Shooter was on board,
man, don't blame Shooter for that. Shooter's not going to micromanage yet. It happens after Secret Wars when he starts micromanaging. Before that,
he was plotting a bunch of those stories.
Jim Salicrup was the editor.
I understand that.
But they reported to them.
But he was plotting a lot of those issues, and he was aware of this plot point because he's the one who finally says we can't do it, not because it's tasteless, but because What If is already doing this. So he did know it was happening.
I don't know if he's the one that came up with we can't do it because of What If, or somebody else did, or Salicrup did, or whatever.
What I've read is it was in fact Shooter who said this is why we can't do it.
All right. Well, again, you can't blame Shooter for coming at the end of something that's already a mess.
Well, you know what? You think I attack him so much? Why don't I defend him here? How about I actually read what Shooter himself has said about this issue? Is that cool?
He takes the blame.
Oh, I'm going to read
That's
it right now.
Man does. Yeah. That's what a stand-up person does. You take the blame.
So here's what Shooter says. I found my copy of Avengers number 200. I read it. I agree with the consensus. It's heinous.
It's heinous.
But I don't remember much. I don't remember much about how it got that way. I'm credited not only as editor-in-chief, but as one of the co-plotters. However, I didn't see anything in the book that jogged my memory. No bits that I remember suggesting. No corrections of the sort I might have made to a plot that passed before me. But I did see many things I would have changed if I'd seen the plot. For instance, leaving aside the Ms. Marvel mess for the nonce, Iron Man thinks it's okay for the weird, mysterious child to be given a laser torch and electronic equipment so he can build a machine. What? As the massive machine's being assembled, no one bothers to question what it is or does. What? Trouble ensues. No kidding, really? Good grief. At that time, I didn't approve plots. Editors did. I can think of no reason that plot would have been passed before me. I don't remember participating in a plotting session. David Michelini lived far away and seldom came to the office. He and Bob Layden plotted books together mostly over the phone, then Dave wrote them up and presented to the editor. I don't know to what extent George Perez was involved. George often added bits and scenes or made a small change to stories he was drawing, so possibly that's why he was given a plot credit. Usually writers didn't mind George's modifications because they were generally pretty good. Generally, the first time I saw a book was when the finished pages were given to me to sign off on before they were sent to Chemical Color, the separators. There were exceptions, of course, books with which I was more involved. I don't think this is one of them, but possibly I made some suggestions that garnered me a co-plotted credit. And if so, what was I thinking? And I guess I signed off on this book. I regret it. But in those days, in any case, the buck stopped at my desk. I take full responsibility. I screwed up. My judgment failed, or maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Sorry. Avengers number 200 is a travesty.
There's nothing you could do. I mean, the story, you mentioned a laser torch for a little kid. You know what's interesting? I was, flipping through the book, and I noticed that they have a scene where Hawkeye's like eating at a table, and they come to him and he says, "Hey, you need to put this kid in a cage." And I'm like, that's why I love Hawkeye. He says what everybody's thinking. He says, "Hey, what is this kid? He's walking around here, whatever. Put him in a cage, man. We don't know who he is." But again, Iron Man, whoever, I guess, there's also that, hey, they're like, I'm Iron Man. What could he do that I can't stop?
Yeah. Nothing about the story makes sense. Nothing. And that's why I really think what happened was there was a last minute deadline doom fear. I think they got all hands on deck and just tried to pump out a script as quick as they possibly could have. And Michelini, I think, had something far more tasteful planned. Whether it would have worked out in the end or not, so anyone's bet. But I think he intended to treat this as a more serious tragedy. And then this last minute marathon session, we got something that was equal bits dark and tragic and weirdly fun and whimsical and silly. It almost feels like a Mr. Impossible Man script. It almost feels like it's going to be him popping out. It's so weird and doesn't make any sense. And
did you actually say popping out?
Yeah, I said that. I know they didn't mean to make light of rape. I know that wasn't the intention. I think this was a byproduct of a very unfortunate circumstance when dealing with a very, very difficult topic that they should have been more careful about and weren't.
Jeff, it wasn't a rape till issue 200. It was a birth before that. It was a birth. Now, you can argue they could have just said, well, we were lovers in limbo and she had the kid. Now, why the kid came out as him, that's another problem. But it just, it's like you said, that last issue was heinous.
Yeah. And I think it's weird. You're right. It wasn't the Star Trek episode I talked about. There's no actual sex that leads to the impregnation. She's just suddenly magically pregnant. I think, again, Michelini was trying to make it more sensitive by showing them actually falling in love, kind of. But then also he adds to the script the fact that he was controlling her mind the whole time. So
Yeah.
they weren't falling in love. And then he wiped her memory of it, which is a whole other level of red flag. And you're like, dude, every time you try to make this better, you make it worse. Just stop.
I mean, I guess that's why people didn't take comic books seriously for the longest.
Yeah, and it is a different time. These guys are coming from a different reality, but it also speaks to this really dark attitude that women are really just there to help men recreate themselves in a younger version. And then she just gets whisked off afterwards. Hey, I need legacy. I need a baby. You come here. Bam, I did my thing. You go away.
I do like that they try to stop it. I remember I was like, hold on, you're not going. A bunch of them said, hold it.
Yeah.
And she insisted. I mean, it's something.
Well, I mean, and there's your proof again. This is a rush job because the character who looked the most concerned on Carol's behalf, other than Wanda, the one who really looked like he'd do something about it by the end, was Captain America. And he's suspiciously not on panel at all in the end of that issue number 200. It's like they just kind of forgot to use him.
Maybe they mind wiped them. A lot of that going around.
Do you have a feeling that we're going to see this episode go live and neither one of us is going to remember recording it? They mismarbled us.
I want to forget it right now.
Oh my gosh.
How'd you make me read this?
Because it was such a great run until issue 200.
You just want to beat up Jim Shooter one last time until the next time.
I only started reading Avengers from the Kree Skrull War up about 15 years ago. And I was really enjoying it. And I remember I knew 200 was supposed to be horrifically bad. I knew that. People equated it's like Action Comics number 592 with Big Barda's rape. Oh my God, rape again as a plot device. Jeez, didn't even mean that. But I remember thinking, it can't be that bad. This is such a good run. And then I got there and I was like,
well, what could I say? You know what? I mean, I thought you said that you've been reading it, but I thought afterwards when Jim Shooter came back with issue 211, that was a great year also. And it led to Roger Stern writing it. So there's a lot more good books ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that interesting? I know you've done a podcast already about the fall of Hank Pym, but there was another case where something was done to a woman that wasn't really thought about or considered at the time. And then afterwards, because there was backlash, Shooter really had to go back and give it consequences and make it substantial and make there be a consequence for Hank Pym's actions. I wonder if that would have happened if they hadn't screwed up Avengers number 200 earlier on and he hadn't already felt that pressure on him.
I understand that the whole plot was to have him fall and redeem himself. Part of it, he was going to be divorced from Jan.
Right.
But the hitting part wasn't part of it. But I don't know if that's really, I mean, why would she divorce him otherwise?
And I guess there's the point again, is that what happened to Jan wasn't really important for her. It was a way of exploring Hank Pym's personal story arc. But then it went too far. And Shooter realized, I have to export this means to Jan or I'm going to get crucified.
Well, at the end, I mean, you say maybe it didn't start out as wanting to be important for her, but she became the leader of the Avengers and a pretty good one.
Oh yeah, I think it changed the Wasp as a character. I don't know about permanently because I haven't read Avengers past number 300.
But she's a badass.
It definitely made her a very likable character after that point, no doubt about it.
Yeah, she was a bubblehead before that, and then she became, a pretty serious leader.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that like while X-Men is like eating up sales in the newsstands at this point, and they're all about strong female characters. That's a lot of what's selling the book. It took Avengers until Wasp gets backhanded to actually start taking their female characters seriously at all. And Avengers number 200 should have been a place where that changed, and it wasn't, and that's too bad.
Well, we can't go back. It is what it is.
For better and for worse. In this case, definitely for worse.
Stop blaming Shooter.
No. We still have to talk about Bruce Banner at the YMCA locker room one day. I'm saving that for another day.
I'm sure you are.
Oh. And him buying negligees for Andesenti as well. We got to talk about that one day.
Oh, I never heard about that, but you
have
to tell me this. Off camera, you got to tell me about this.
On camera, I'll tell you. It's just a he said, she said. She says he basically bought her a very inappropriate sexual teddy, and he claims it was a costume, and that's really it. But like, it feels skeezy. You don't buy clothing.
You know what, Jeff?
You don't buy clothing for an employee who is the opposite sex that could even possibly be interpreted as sexual. Well, did we cover it? Did we do it all?
I think we did.
All right. Well, in that case, thanks for joining us so much for this episode today. We hope you enjoyed it. The CCF In Depth theme song is written, performed by Paul King. Special thanks to Scott Harris King, who created the original CCF podcast that we appreciate so very much. And of course, a massive, massive thank you to our Patreon supporters, which include Bill Sinclair, Michael Gallagher, Paolo Zakedu, Tim Schneider, and also Berkeley. You guys make such a huge difference. We appreciate you so much.
Warriors all.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, you can check us out at patreon.com/the Classic Comics Forum. Or if you want to support us otherwise without spending a penny, you just hit like and subscribe, which helps us immensely. Check out the channel and find us at classiccomics.org for a lot of great conversation. We'd love to see you there.
Yeah, come check us out at CCF Forum, because we talk a lot of stupid garbage that's not important, but it's fun.
It's a lot of fun, and you make friends for life, like George here, who I've never ever met in person yet.
That's your loss.
It is, man, but at least I get to look at you. I'm going to send you a negligee.
I'm not innocenti. I will slap you.
Classic Comics, the Classic Comics Forum in depth. Snappy conversations with your hosts, George and Jeff.